Hello everyone and welcome to today's performance assurance webinar. My name is Jenny and I'll be facilitating today's event. And today I'm joined by Anton, Daniel and Alex from the performance assurance function. And just before we get started, I just want to go through some housekeeping with you all. So as always, this event will be recorded. We will be using Slido throughout. So if you have any questions at any point, just pop them into Slido. The QR code, the joining code and the link are all available to you now. So I'll just wait a moment and let people join now. And just while people are joining Slido, I will share the agenda with you all now. So as you can all see, we have a lot to get through. So I will hand over to Anton.
Yeah, thank you for taking the time to join. Engaging with you is one of the most important things that we do. So as ever, we try and think in advance of these meetings, what's the best use of all of our times? And part of that is to look back and to look forward. So we've collected a range of things that will be relevant. The most important thing probably of all is the thing that comes last, which is question and answers. So if there's anything in particular on what we've discussed or what we haven't discussed, we would welcome your questions. If there is something in a particular slot, we're also up for that direct engagement. So without further ado, let's start by looking back. I think we hand over to Alex for this.
Yes, Bill, thanks very much. And Jenny, if we move on to the next slide, please. Right, so there's kind of, there's been a lot happening, but the kind of key 4 things that we wanted to flag to people are as follows, and we'll start with annulments. So annulments have been quite a kind of focal point of discussion for the last couple of pubs. And you may have seen the kind of amendment that we have issued, which will bring the code back into alignment with SLC. Ofgem's SLC, and kind of this will mainly impact the kind of definition of annulment itself, and also the kind of requirements that we put for processing the annulments by the initiating supplier. So that kind of has gone through already, and we've also updated, therefore, the retail risk register to kind of account for that, for those changes. And then we have the unqualified MEM appointments. So many of you would have probably received a fair amount of emails from myself and Daniel on this. We're essentially looking at kind of the population of our meter points and just verifying that they have the correct and qualified MEM appointed as kind of prescribed in the code. We have really good engagement on this. We've basically halved, or like more than halved, the number of meter points where qualified MEMs weren't appointed. And kind of where we are at this stage as well is mostly about kind of cleaning the data. So a lot of times people have actually appointed the qualified MEM. It's just not reflected on the systems for whatever reason. So we are kind of working hard and engaging with people on this. But yeah, like huge steps that we've taken on this so far. And then thirdly, we have the TDIS verification. So in November, the PAP approved 2 verification activities, which are taking are happening at the moment. Firstly, we are issuing kind of requests for samples to a number of suppliers, and we'll be looking at their TDIS submissions and just checking that they're kind of, have been done correctly, that all the documentation there is kind of good or relevant. And then secondly, we're doing a bit of a deeper dive with one party. And that is kind of, that includes looking at both the samples and also their kind of internal processes and reviewing those. So this is both kind of happening at the moment. And then finally, we have the data cleanse focus. So we are quite keen to prioritize activities that bring the most benefits to parties. And in order to kind of identify those benefits and make this cost effective, we will be looking to engage with you, but I think Anton has a bit more on that further in the presentation, so I'll just leave it at that for the moment. And then Jenny, if we jump to the next slide, please. Perfect. So then we have a bit on the performance trends from the last quarter. It is a mixed picture overall. I'll start on the left-hand side. So we have the delayed switches. Obviously, objections are kind of available to parties to prevent erroneous switches. But as with everything, we monitor outliers, so people who kind of tend to use them more than their comparable kind of peers and similar companies. And again, it does not necessarily mean that there is something going on, but it could signal potential misuse. And we've seen quite a drop on the people kind of number of instances above threshold on this. So we will be looking a bit kind of more in a bit more detail into this as part of the critical changes deep dive, because part of what this kind of retail risk looks at is objections to change of occupier switches. So following the introduction of Arrow 155, we're doing a bit of a deeper kind of dive into what that means and how that was kind of, how that impacted parties and whether it had the desired effect. So we'll have a bit more to share on kind of retail risk 8 in the near future. And then if we move on to inaccurate addresses and kind of address data, so again, kind of mixed picture here. The increase, the 33% increase in the number of parties above threshold for retail risk 6 is kind of largely driven by parties failing to update their MPL addresses within the code timeframes. And in particular, we've kind of focused on 2 parties on this, and they have now completed an action plan to improve their performance. So we expect that this number will kind of, drop or decrease in the next quarter. And then in terms of the drop in retail risk 10, so it's been a huge drop, 67%. And this is largely due to, everyone's kind of hard work on this as well, and kind of reflects the successful application of performance assurance techniques, and also your hard work and kind of monitoring this and keeping below the threshold. So great results on that. And then in terms of erroneous switches, so the last one, we have seen an uptick of 67%. However, as we kind of engaged with the parties and spoken to people, it looks like there may be, again, a bit of a data issue rather than something happening in the market issue. So essentially, we have historically relied on kind of nosy flows to confirm registration dates. However, we have noted that parties have dropped in their use of the nosy flow in gas, and that therefore has skewed the kind of actual number of cases over threshold. So we will take that away and we'll kind of look to reconfigure this data on this retail risk driver in the near future. But yeah, this is kind of what it looks like at the moment. I'll just pause quickly if there's any questions on this. And if not, I think we can move on to the forward plan with Daniel and Anton. Well, thank you.
Yeah, amazing. Thanks, Alex. Appreciate you giving us a good view there of what we've been doing sort of over the last 3 months and what we've identified. So I think, next let's take a look forward at what sort of priorities are coming up. I think if we start, we possibly go on to the key activities that we're expecting sort of rec parties to be doing over the next month. As always, we've put together a little checklist of key things that you can be actioning over the month related to rec performance assurance. There's the usual stuff on there in terms of submitting your monthly data as per the PARC, the Performance Assurance Reporting Catalogue, and also always want to plug that please have a look at your dashboards in the rec portal, because that might give you some good insights into how your performance over certain risk drivers has been changing over the last few months. As always, as well, we'll be issuing performance assurance techniques or PATs where there are areas that the co-manager or PAB have identified that we need further information to help us sort of manage it and monitor any retail risks. I think specifically this month, some things to be looking out for. So I say this month, technically it's a month and a bit, but at the end of next month, Data Cleanse Sprint 5 will be ending. So again, if you're having any sort of troubles with sort of resolving any of the last few items on your data cleanse activities, please do let us know, just so we can help support where needed. I know Alex has mentioned a couple of these as well, but we've recently sent out some PATs around suppliers where we've identified that you have some meter points with a MEM that's not qualified. And also we've recently sent out some PATs around TDIS verification as well, which was a steer given to us by Ofgem, and PAB obviously recently approved the scope of what those verification activities would include. I think another pack that we sent out recently as well. So apologies if you're a supplier that got caught up by multiple ones of these. But we've also sent out one where we've identified that there's a slight discrepancy between EES and CSS, in the sense that there are a bunch of meter points in EES which are showing as disconnected. But they have not yet been deregistered in CSS as per sort of relevant schedule around that. So we have sort of notified suppliers where that is the case and asked you to either double check with the DNO whether it should be a disconnected meter point, or updates the registration status via CSS. I think final plug as well would be that a few weeks ago, we uploaded the 2026-2027 TDIS theft targets. So if you're a supplier, you can go into your REC portal dashboard and see what your targets are for the upcoming TDIS year. As always as well, REC parties do have an annual maintenance qualification submission. That deadline is in the REC portal, but if you're sort of struggling to identify what your deadline is or what your requirements are, as always, please just let us know. I think that's everything I wanted to say in terms of key priorities for parties over the next month. So I think next we just want to talk a little bit about some of the key activities that we're going to be doing as the code manager over the next month. I think some of you will have sort of seen the scope of these pieces of work already, but we're doing a couple of deep dives, specifically one on the escalations process involving SDEP, and we're also doing a deep dive on sort of reviewing recent rec changes. I think if we just start talking a little bit about this one here, which is the SDEP escalations one. So again, this is something that came to us as a priority from previous PA webinars and from previous PABs as well. Essentially, we understand that where the escalation process is ineffective, that then leads to an inefficient retail energy market, and obviously that will then have downstream impacts on consumers as well. So in terms of the scope of the work we're doing here, what we've been trying to do is identify which escalation processes are working well or aren't working well, and obviously for the ones that aren't working well, trying to understand how those can be improved, such as do we need to provide updated processes or guidance documents or things like that. And it can also feed into any benefit analysis too for any sort of future cost benefit analysis on technical changes. I think just if we go on to the next slide, just to give you an update on the progress we've made so far. So at the last PA webinar, we launched this activity on the Escalations Deep Dive, and then subsequently we got PAB to approve the scope of this deep dive as well. So since then, we've had interviews with a wide range of stakeholders to understand some of the key pain points around the escalation process, and those stakeholders were large suppliers, small suppliers, DNOs, MEMS, broad section. I think there was some interesting sort of responses that we got. I think most of them sort of expected around things like not getting responses to escalations, raising escalations before general queries in SDEP, or not waiting the full 5 working days, and also little technical things like the inconsistent use of the archiving function, or parties not filling out all the fields in an SDEP message. So what we've done is we've taken the key insights from those interviews, and we're going to be sort of distributing a survey to all REC parties in order to get a wider input and to validate the findings that we got from those interviews. And we're also going to be reviewing some of the data that we receive on a monthly basis from SDEP, again, to validate the findings that we've had and to help us build out any outputs from this activity. I think a couple of the key outputs that the parties asked us to think about are, firstly, if we can provide any sort of guidance documents on expectations for how to operate the escalation process, as well as if there's anything around any consequences for parties that aren't complying with any code obligations around that. In terms of timeframes, or in terms of next steps, I should say, we're going to be presenting our findings to PAB in a few months, and we're also going to be sharing any outputs with the rest of the industry, including things like updated guidance documents. Again, it'll be literally, I think next week you'll be getting a survey to sort of provide more input into this, but if anyone wants to volunteer their time for a more in-depth interview, then you know where to reach out to us and sort of do that. I think that's everything we want to say on the SDEP Escalations Deep Dive. I think if we move on to the sort of critical change deep dive that we're also doing. So I think there's a recognition that some of the recent rec change process reviews that we've done have identified some challenges around, identifying, delivering, and realizing the benefits of rec changes. So what we wanted to do, if we please move on to the next slide, is we wanted to, in fact, if we move on to one after that, I've already spoken over this, wanted to do a bit of a review of a recent rec change 155, to understand to what extent the change process helped drive any positive or negative outcomes as a result of that change, and to what extent the change as well sort of delivered what it expected to. So we do have some initial data that's come in from this. So suppliers will be aware that they're submitting Park Report 1450 around the non-domestic change of occupier process. And we have been applying individual PATs to parties around certain risk drivers, such as objection rates, but it's also helping us sort of identify trends in the time taken to respond to objection requests to change of occupier requests, and also time or sort of percentage of these change of occupier requests that are accepted. We're also, again, for this one, going to be sending out a survey to parties to understand to what extent parties think that Rec Change 155 delivered the objectives it set out to do, to what extent the process is now clear. Again, the cost benefit of the cost of implementing this change versus the benefit of having this consistent process outlined in guidance, and to what extent as well that the parties believe that other suppliers are complying. We'll also be getting an external sort of sentiment from other people impacted by this change, such as TPIs and consumer groups, just to get that full view on the sort of effectiveness of the implementation of Rec Change 155. Again, as soon as we've got the sort of responses from those surveys, we will be sort of understanding to what extent we need to make any recommendations or adjustments to how change processes are operated in the future. So yeah, again, for both of these, we'll be sending out surveys to get parties' inputs, but please let us know if there's anything that you want to sort of say further on that as well. I think those are a couple of areas, like I say, that parties have outlined to us that they want us to be investigating. I think another area that's super important under the REC is data quality. I know, Anton, we're doing some work around that recently, which I think you want to talk a bit more about.
I do indeed, and there is a slide. One of the things that we need to consider in delivering our framework is being proportionate in the amount of time we spend analysing what we should do and delivering it, right? And one of the things, like trying to get that balance right, is a real challenge that I spend my time thinking about. And we've been trying to do greater analysis to have more informed decision making through data quality deep dive. This is something we've been doing with the PAB. It's really important that this doesn't happen in isolation. So the key aim here is to make sure decision making around data cleanse is more effective. We clearly need to cleanse data. There are issues that it causes for others, but the prioritization approach we think can be improved. We also think we get focused on the impacts. That's something that we can probably have a good view on, but we don't always get focused on the costs. And let's be really clear, all of the work to cleanse data is important, but it does cost parties. So we need to balance those two things in how much data cleanse and how fast we're thinking about it. So what we're looking to do is identify like how bad data problems can be and how hard it is to resolve them to have better decision making. So that is the key purpose of this. Our goal is to do this on sprint 6. The eagle-eyed will know that sprint 5 is nearly closing, and sprint 6 is obviously the next one. They don't typically line up back to back. And the reason for that is we definitely want to see how things finish before we commission a new one to start. So we've done an initial assessment. There is a PAB paper that sets all of this out, but I wanted to talk about some of that. So we applied our proposed approach to analysing costs and benefits to the items in sprint 5. We don't have a view on how expensive things are for you, but we do have a view on the issues that might be caused by them. This involved us doing some estimates, and we have launched today a consultation to validate those estimates. Now, if you think our estimates are roughly right, good enough for decision making, you can tell us that. If you think we've got the wrong estimates or the wrong sources or the wrong methods, you can tell us that as well. I think we need to be clear. If you provide us any financial information or estimates of costs, we don't think that's something we should be sharing. Clearly, we need to aggregate it and share the total outputs, but we don't think that's something that's appropriate to be shared. In the same way that we do think if you say on a consultation that this is non-confidential, then we do think those kind of comments sometimes are beneficial to be shared. We think your engagement is essential. Otherwise, it can turn into a bit of an academic exercise that is not as grounded in reality. And that does mean that perhaps the time analysing is less beneficial. Our approach is to identify the different benefits and say perhaps there's a value of the of cleansing that data item. And clearly, cleansing one data item is not very valuable. Cleansing many items is much more valuable. So we're trying to multiply that by the number that's open. This does have a strange effect. You'll see on the right that we have estimated the values of the various items that are in the Sprint 5 catalogue. It does show that the total benefit to be achieved in 2 of them that are green is very low. Now that seems a bit weird, but that is a good thing. And the reason for this is that these have been very effectively cleaned by the relevant parties, and that means the population is very small, so that the benefit of cleansing that population is estimated to be very little. Having said that, if there's still 500 of those, that's a very small population, but there may be benefits in still cleansing those 500 to kind of clear the decks, and the whole industry can then maintain a clear set of data in that space. So when we do get to making decisions, it is not as simple as picking the biggest number. Having said that, picking the biggest number is clearly part of the thought process. We need your help to assess the following: the costs that issues cause you. And let's be clear, there might be an item updated by one type of party where the costs are affected to another part. So even if it's a supplier or DNO owned data item, if you're a mower or a MAM, for example, and you have issues that this causes, it drives inefficiencies in your business or challenges, you can please tell us what they are, how prevalent they are when this data item is affected or has those issues with it, and how much roughly that might cost you that issue. Separately, because there may be multiple issues caused by a data thing, we just want to know the people who have to cleanse that data. How hard is it? An estimate of those costs. The consultation is live until the 10th of April, and we will share the link to it with these slides, so you will have that link and it will be publicised on the bulletin. I do appreciate this is something that's new. If you have any questions about it, or sometimes you have like an insight but it doesn't quite fit the consultation, don't be a stranger. You can please speak to our team. You could discuss it with us. You could say, look, I get where you're going, but actually do this instead. That might be better. You know, we are up for that. Before we move on this, I want to just highlight that the mid-sprint review numbers do tell quite a clear story with our current estimating methodology, and that is the key benefit to be had is about improving the quality of meter technical details in gas, because at the time we ran these numbers, the cleansing of data in electricity, we don't have the multiplier. I don't think it would be as high as in gas, but this does seem to suggest that the sprints would benefit from MAMs and mowers cleansing meter technical details. That is the kind of, without listening to you, that's kind of where the logic is taking us. Of course, if you're a MAM or a mower, right, please make sure that we're making decisions on the right information. If you're a supplier and this causes you issues, or you think that we've missed, that's the list, and there's the biggest game in town is not on that list, please tell us, because it is really important that we focus in the right areas, because it's not just our time, it's your time and effectively your money to cleanse these. So we are really keen that we do so in the optimal way. So that's all I really wanted to cover on data cleanse. I just wanted to move on to another thing that is quite important to us, and we want to make sure that is visible to you. One of the things, reflecting on the past year or two, where things probably haven't been as good as they could be, has been the alignment of performance assurance activities across codes. Now, there are more performance assurance activities across codes than there previously were, and they are more interconnected than they previously were. And we had, in particular, some challenges around a supplier who subsequently went solar. Now, these do highlight how important it is for these different organisations to work together, partly so that they are as effective as they can be, but equally so they are efficient for all of the parties. I think that's really important. So, driven by the RECPAB, honestly, we initiated a work stream that was focused on driving these improvements. For those who really love detail, there is a white paper within the PAB papers, not this month, I believe it was the month before, that gives you the full detail, but we went through a collaborative process to work out how this could be better. There are 5 key things that I want to draw out. Below those, there actually might be 2 or 3 actions per thing, but I think this is the right summary. The first one is data sharing. Sometimes the code managers' kind of legal constructs can make that a little bit more challenging and complicated. And we think that often just drives kind of inefficiencies. So getting this right, getting the right principles for the right type of sharing and the right controls to make sure only the right type of sharing is important. And it's preparatory work that can be done to enable better collaboration kind of in the heat of the moment. Coordinated effort for sanctions is important. Clearly, we need to avoid kind of double jeopardy, but we also need to avoid incoherence between different organisations. So having coordinated effort for the most important sanctions is important, and all of the codes are present on the RECPAB, and it is a bit more complicated. So for the REC is represented at the BSc, so there is joint membership, but those coordinated effort across the code managers to make sure this is a single coherent thing, no double jeopardy, no confusion, we think that's a really important thing. And the process for identifying interdependencies, the obvious things in my mind are the overlaps with the second metering and meter communication, and the importance of the data to all of us. It drives settlement. Often it's populated by the REC. That is really important. Being able to understand these interdependencies, so these code managers can either say, hey, look, you're doing that, it has positive effects for us, we don't also need to do it. I think that's a really positive thing and can simplify the experience for the parties. Escalation of major service incidents, I do quite like that spilled glass of orange juice, perhaps it is, icon. This is probably a bit dated now, but making sure that when there are major incidents, and there was one several years back that we refer to as the major switching incident, I think making sure these people are linked up and all of the angles are considered so that the kind of whole problem can be treated is really important. So getting an agreed approach for mobilisation in such scenarios and having that ready in case it's ever needed, let's hope it never is really important. And finally, I think this is the one that probably should be most visible to parties, is coordinating initiatives considering peak periods for parties. This seems to me is really important, and that is sharing the various operating plans and making sure that we don't all come to the same type of organisation all at once. You know, it's not just the codes, is it, that results in work for the regulatory functions of these organisations. There's government, there's Ofgem, there's all sorts of organisations, perhaps NESO. So if there is anything we can do to smooth that, or at least be cognizant of that in the way that we communicate with organisations, we should. The REC has taken a lead on this. I have presented this to most of the PABs and PAFAs, and I'll be going next week to the final PAB. And there has been significant buy-in to try and enhance this and make things smoother, more effective, and more joined up, primarily for the benefit of parties, but also just for the efficiency benefit. So that was the last thing I wanted to present on. But before we move on, I think we're about to move on to Q&A. I did want to point to an emerging issue that is well beyond the pure scope of the REC. There has been an increase in global conflict around the world, and I am not, and neither is our team, a military or geopolitical expert, but I think it would be reasonable to forecast that there is likely to be some energy price shocks, and in some markets, not the one that we work in, there already have been some price shocks. It's very hard for us to know exactly how this is going to pan out, but this is something that we'll be talking to the PAB about next week to try and prepare and be coordinated and thoughtful. We don't know how this will affect you as a business, and we don't know how this will affect the market. We have some theories, but if you see something that's happening that is unusual around the performance of others, or if there are challenges in your business that impact the REC, I think it's important that you engage with us. It makes it much simpler for us to be able to be pragmatic where that's appropriate. If we've engaged with people, we understand, we've jointly thought it through. Now, I really hope that none of that is needed. I genuinely hope that is the case, and it may not be, but we are entering a period of, uncertainty and possible challenges. So to be open, so that we can be appropriate. Should there be anything that does change in the way we approach things, I think the most important thing we need to do is communicate that. There are no plans at this stage to change things, but if we do, we will make sure that we engage with you, not just on the what, but on the why and the thinking, so that you can understand where we're coming from. I think that probably is the most important learning, that we make it clear what's in our minds, not just what you guys need to do. Anyway, that was a bit of a random aside. I think it's now time for question and answer.
Thank you, Anton. There are two questions currently. So the first one was, how can I see when my annual statement and compliance statement are due?
Oh, that is oh, go on then.
Go on. I was going to say it should be in the REC portal under training, surveys and forms. However, I appreciate it's not always immediately apparent when you first log into the REC portal. So that's one of the things that is being considered as part of the REC portal relaunch on how this information can be more easily shared with parties. Sorry, Anton, I completely interrupted you mid-flow. What were you going to say around this?
Unfortunately, I was going to give a less comprehensive answer. Although it's worth saying, if you get stuck, like the portal is there for a self-service experience, and once you crack it, then if you forget, you can look it up again. But if you do get stuck, the inquiries mailbox, that the help desk are there to help you, and they should be able to just look yours up. So don't suffer in silence. Maybe that's my quote of this webinar, because don't suffer in silence.
Thanks both. And the second question is regarding SDEP. Any improvements to reporting with SDEP?
Yeah. So
yes,
there have been.
I mean,
go on, Daniel.
Go on. No, you do it, Anton. Go on.
I think we should acknowledge that there are a need to improve the usability and the information provided on SDEP. There have been a series of changes on that. I believe it's of the order of R120, so it might be R120, 21 and 22. I believe improvements to the UX have been launched and that further are still going through the change process. I think the things that you're referring to are in some of those later numbered changes. And I believe that this isn't a performance assurance matter, but I believe there was some information in the last week or so which clarified this. I think maybe some engagement to ask for your input. So I know that is a slightly vague thing. Grace, I don't mind connecting you directly with that information afterwards, so that the vagueness is a bit more precise. And if anyone else is interested in that, please let us know. Daniel.
No, I completely agree with everything you said. I think to build on it, so specifically the change you're referring to is Rec Change 122. So there is currently a consultation open on that as well, which is due to close tomorrow. So it's very, very apt timing for this question. I think previously the plan was that this would be implemented around November with some improvements to the reporting functionality from SDEP. But again, that's part of the reason that the consultation is currently open, just to sort of address party queries and timeframes and things like that. So.
Great, thank you both. I think I'll just leave the QR code on the screen a moment longer. If anybody wants to raise anything verbally, you can always raise your hand and we can take you off mute. I think we've finished quite ahead of schedule, so I'm going to launch the feedback form now. Thank you everybody for joining today. We hope you found the session useful as always. We appreciate your feedback and we hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks all. Bye.
Thank you for your time.